All right, I think it's time for us to get started. Again, I'll say my name is Lee Payne. I'll be sort of moderating things here today. Two very experienced individuals in the safety and compliance world who are going to talk about hours of service and the transition to electronic logging devices, as you would commonly hear them referred to. First, we're going to have, he's the president of Fleet Safety Services and its Chief Safety Officer. Jeff has over 25 years of experience in the He's often cited in industry journals, magazines, and publications, and is generally just a very knowledgeable individual when it comes to managing safety for your fleet. So we're lucky to have him with us today. We're also going to be hearing from Terry Fry. He's the Chief Operating Officer from BigRoad, and he'll be talking a little bit more about electronic logging and BigRoad in general. So next, I'm just going to pass it over to Jeff to get started with his slides. Bear with us for a second while I get that set up. All right, Jeff, if you could just make sure that your line is unmuted, your slides are up, and we're ready to hear your.
I'm unmuted, but I have no slides.
All right, so Jeff, you should now have control of the mouse. Can you see the slides now?
Yes.
Excellent. So I'm going to pass it over to Jeff. I think, Jeff, maybe your volume on your phone might be a little bit low or a little bit lower than ours. So I'm just going to let everyone know if they need to turn up their volume, or if, Jeff, you have a way of turning that up a little bit, that would be perfect. Okay, pass it over to you, Jeff. Thanks a lot.
Well, thanks, guys, and I appreciate the opportunity to share some information. Terry and I did a presentation down at the NASTIC conference recently in Nashville, and that's how we got hooked up together. But my job today is I'm going to give you three perspectives on this whole electronic logging device, e-log device, and sort of put it into perspective as to where we are today concerning the FMCSA and general compliance issues. So we're going to look at three basic things in this short time together. We're going to look at the FMCSA top priorities, and we'll see that the electronic logging device is pretty high on that. We'll also take a look, do a brief primer of how CSA works, just very, very briefly. And then we'll finally look at how hours of service can affect our CSA basics, and ultimately how they affect the freight management and freight distribution that we have within our companies. FMCSA has outlined 5 priorities for 2015. They did this back in October. And the first one I want to spend just a few seconds on, and that is CSA Phase 3, or full interventions. Those of us that are in the motor carrier world and work with CSA on a daily basis, we're thinking, geez, this can't have any more to this program. But unfortunately, what the data shows, only about 10 states have the full interventions going on CSA. And when I mean interventions, or what the agency means interventions, what they're actually talking about is they're talking about how the DOT will come in and audit, how enforcement activities will take place in light of CSA. So what we have coming our way in 2015, the other 40 states getting into full intervention mode. So that means a lot more visits, a lot more audits, and a lot more interventions from the agency. The second highest priority for 2015, as we can see, is the electronic logging device final rule. And Terry mentioned that. That's our best guess date estimate. The agency is trying to be somewhat firm with that date. I wouldn't say it's in concrete yet, but we're really, anything can happen in Washington, but it sort of looks like it's coming that way. By the way, this proposal has already passed the Office of Management and Budget Scrutiny. That shows the financial impact on the trucking industry. So the stars are lining up for this regulation to be released. Third is inspection modernization. They're doing some software updates on their Roadside software. Next, number 4 is Safety Fitness Determination Rule. This is another biggie. This Safety Fitness Determination Rule, in actuality, if the agency is successful, it will turn our CSA scores into our safety rating. And this is really huge when it comes to not only the small carrier, the mid-sized carrier, but the large carrier. In the past, your safety rating for your company has been based on an historical audit of documents. Under this rule, if the agency is successful, on a monthly basis, your CSA scores will convert directly into the motor carrier safety fitness rating. So again, just another reason. The proposed rule is not out yet. We're not exactly sure what the agency is thinking. We've heard some rumor and some innuendo of what might happen, but expect that rule to make some traction next year. And finally, the unified registration system, the way new carriers and the way we renew our registrations will be greatly changed. Now let's take a quick look at a CSA scorecard and go through about a 90-second primer on how CSA works. This is the old CSA scorecard. It's been supposedly revamped and updated. I think it's a little more complicated, but we'll use this as our training tool because it's easily seen how the scoring system works. Basically, every roadside inspection, every traffic enforcement, every maintenance violation, every accident that a motor carrier is involved in is downloaded into one of these 7 basics. With that, they stir it all together in a pot, and I'll show you a little bit of that pot stirring on the next slide, and they come up with a percentile ranking. A percentile ranking, we're looking here where the mouse arrow is the percentile ranking for this example motor carrier we're looking. The agency says that the higher your score is, 100%, the more unsafe you are, and the lower your score is, 0%, the safer you are. So this is just exactly opposite of going to school. So those of you that have had 97 in hours of service thinking that you're doing real good, that's not a good score. A is awful, B is bad, C is cruddy, D is delightful, E is excellent, F is fantastic. So we're looking for Fs in these scores. We want all zeros or low. This example, the carrier is not over the established thresholds. The agency, through their statistical analysis, have come up with these thresholds. So, for example, in hours of service compliance, this carrier is in the 33 percentile. This carrier could go up as high as 65 percentile before the golden triangle would be issued to the carrier. So these golden triangles, as we refer to them, basically state that the carrier has been selected for further monitoring. Our freight brokers, our freight people, or the shipping public have interpreted, have changed this into the skull and crossbones. So we certainly want to avoid these at all costs. So again, controlling our unsafe driving, our hours of service, for instance, are really critical to keep these triangles off our scorecard. As we look a little deeper into the scorecard, we see there's 2 segments. First, this is the performance section. As you can see, this score is from on-road performance. That's how well our drivers have performed on the highway. The second column, which you can earn a triangle, golden triangle, is from investigations or internal audits or interventions. So there's 2 ways that you can order it, like under hours of service, you can either gain a triangle by performance, or you can be found in violation once they come into your office to audit. So 2 ways. A lot of people don't make that distinction. If you get an hours of service violation to a critical view, then once you get to a critical rate of violation in hours of service in an audit, you will get a golden triangle for 12 months, even if you repair that and notify the Department of Transportation. Your golden triangle will stay on there, as a punishment for 12 months. So it's real simple, folks. All you have to do is be perfect on the highway and perfect in the office. Now here's the revamped and revised scorecard, and you can see our sample motor carrier here is lit up. I call it lit up like a Christmas tree. They are deficient in a number of basics. And what the agency did with the new scorecard, they did a couple of changes. The first thing is they placed in the safety rating on the home page for everybody to see. And as Nastic and David Owen and many others will attest to, this is the only true safety fitness rating item right now that has passed the regulatory mustard, is your safety rating that's based on a compliance review. These ratings down here, as far as I'm concerned, are just hearsay for the time being. Although they're being used practically by our shippers, our brokers, insurance companies, and the plaintiff bar, in actuality, this is the only thing that has passed the regulatory test. These ratings, satisfactory, conditional, and unsatisfactory, you must protect those at all costs. In this example, this motor carrier is lit up like a Christmas tree, as you can see. What the agency has also stated is that the basics are lined up left to right according to that basic's ability to correlate to future crashes. So in other words, the agency says the most critical basic to control is unsafe driving because it leads to the most future crashes. Now again, please take that with a grain of salt. The Government Accounting Office is in complete disagreement with the agency, its own federal government agency, if whether or not this thing really works. But that's how it's lined up. And you can see our topic today, hours of service, is the third most prevalent in the agency's mind. And as most of you know, your crash basic is not displayed to public. You must use your DOT PIN number. In this case, we've logged in under the DOT number's PIN number, so we can see that they're also deficient in crashes. This is the number one area that they'll come in and audit you on. So if you are not checking your CSA score using your PIN number, make sure that you do so. Again, we'll move on to the next one, and I told you I'd spend just a minute to show you this percentile ranking soup. And if you go on your scorecard, you can click on this, and we're going to look at safety event group number 2 in unsafe driving to see exactly who's in that group. And when we break it down, we see that there's 3,878 motor carriers in the whole group. So in Group 2, which is the second dot up here, there are motor carriers that have had 9 to 21 unsafe driving violations in the last 24 months. They all go into Group 2. And in Group 2, we see there's 3,878 carriers in that group. When we look a little closer, the number one safest group, the lead musher in unsafe driving in Group 2, is the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, a bus company operating in D.C., over 1,800 vehicles, and yet they've only had 13 roadside inspections. Compared to the least safe motor carrier is a carrier called Darrell Dixon in Oklahoma. They're only showing one power unit on their MCS 150, but they've had 17 roadside inspections. So you can see how the small carrier, this thing is really slanted against the small carrier. So if you're in Group 2, one of the other 3,800 and some in Group 2, you're floating somewhere around here in the misty flats. So if any of you have been unable to sleep at night trying to figure out how to calculate the percentile ranking, that's step one of about 50 steps of how they come up with that number. Again, I mentioned this slide earlier. The GAO office came out and said that this data is highly suspect. The very same day, the agency responds with a 28-page rebuttal, and then shortly after that, the Inspector General came out and also continued to take a hard look at CSA. These agencies have agreed to disagree at this point as to the accuracy and predictability of CSA. Just a couple of quick slides on the effect of CSA. Here's an Indiana carrier lost their main customer due to some of these golden triangles. Here's an Ohio carrier, about 12 trucks. 24 brokers will not use this motor carrier, and you can see they have no golden triangles. But what the problem with this carrier right now is they have a conditional safety rating. Here's a Missouri carrier that lost a $6 million contract right in the middle of a full implementation of this contract, and at the implementation meeting with a Fortune 500 company, and in the last 15 minutes before being awarded the freight, they were denied due to their unsafe driving basic. Now, if we look at monitored carriers across the United States, this map shows the home domicile of the roughly 49,000 carriers that are monitored in the United States. They have record about 90,000 that actually have data in the CSA system. And you can see right down the Mississippi, very roughly, is where most of the activity is. Most of the roadside inspections, most of the crashes, most of the violations. So if you tend to operate in this geographical area, you can see statistically you're very exposed just for that. We'll go on to the hours of service. Now these are the same motor carriers. Right now there's about 26,000. This is actually 13 data, but it doesn't fluctuate that much. Again, you can see where the carriers with the hours of service violations are located basically in these areas. Doesn't mean that you can't be deficient out here, but statistically the whole data bank is skewed against carriers in the east. When we take a look at all the hours of service violations across the whole spectrum of CSA, what we see is that 70% of the time the hours of service violation is a form and manner error or the logbook's not current. Those two are what I consider and call secretarial skills. That's why products like BigRoad and other products that you can run off your smartphone that can give you an audit, that can give you some warnings to when you're violating the hours of service, they tremendously help this category. Carriers that I've worked with and seen that have implemented electronic logs, they see this form and manner not current greatly be reduced. So a lot of people think it's really the bad stuff that gets us in trouble, the real egregious violations that get us in trouble in hours of service. But in reality, it's really our secretarial skills determine how good our scores are. The most frequent violations as we look at them, in light of frequency as we go up, in light of drivers, the second most prevalent CSA driver violation across the whole United States is a record of duty status not current. Number one is, believe it or not, log violation, form and manner. How well we filled out the log. This is form and manner violations. So it's these simple, as I call them, secretarial skills are what's driving our hours of service basic. Those of you that work with your drivers day in, day out, you know that a lot of times they don't get it on the first training, or the second training, or the third training, or the fourth training. So any aid that we can give them to help them with this paperwork issue will really help our CSA scores and help our companies in the long run. And just another word on form and manner, what we see out there. This slide's broken into two columns. It's your CSA scores or roadside inspections. And when we come to roadside inspections, form and manner and logbook not current are huge. They're the two highest frequency violations by far when it comes to hours of service out on the highway. Conversely, when it comes to a compliance review, form and manner and not current is almost non-existent due to the fact that the logs are already turned in, they're already audited, so it's a historical review of documents that have been created in the past, where this is real time. So what we want to do is really work with our drivers on form and manner. We want to eliminate form and manner violations, because as those increase, that brings them into the audit situation. And then secondly, it's not on this slide, but when we look at not current, well, we do have it here. Not current is very important out on the highway, high priority. It has a higher severity than form and manner as far as a violation, but it is one of the highest, it's the second highest frequency violation when it comes to hours of service. When you get into that internal audit in your office, not current is non-existent unless the log is missing. So that's a great paradox. So here is where we really need help in both areas, but this area is extremely important to control our CSA basics, and the way we do that is by controlling these two, and many carriers have gone to electronic devices to help them to do that, to get away from a paper log. Here is a sample of a motor carrier that implemented electronic logs. Over 6,000 drivers in this company, and look how their basic has dropped as they implemented electronic logs. So I want to get caught up here and skip over just a couple of slides here, and we'll bring us down to how to control our CSA score. You know, we've talked a lot about controlling our hours of service basic, and this still is, as far as I'm concerned, the golden key to heaven to controlling your CSA scores. We've seen from the millions and millions of roadside inspections that about a third of them are triggered by observable defects, things that the inspector can hear, see, smell, taste, or touch. And about a third of them are triggered by unsafe driving, speeding, lane change, falling too close, and about a third of them are triggered by your ISS number. So if we can control these two, basics, we will control our CSA scores. So I know there's a lot of work being done on data queue challenges. I know there's a lot of work of carriers trying to figure out what violations are going to drop, what violations are going to add, and that's all fine and dandy, but this is where the rubber meets the road right here. This is what we've really got to work on with our drivers, our unsafe driving, our observable defects, because if we can control this, and by the way, if we do not control these two, we will never control our hours of service basic, because this is, you know how they catch so many drivers with their logbook not up to date, is the driver's going down the road with a tail light out. The inspector stops and pulls him over because he knows he's going to get the tail light violation, and lo and behold, the first thing he asks for is the logbook, and the logbook, if it's not current, that's where you get the logging violations. So with that, I'm out of time, and Lee, I'll pass it over to you, and if there's any questions, we can certainly take those.
Great. Thanks a lot, Jeff. That was super informative, and we do have a few questions here that I'd like to pass your way. The first question I'd like to ask on behalf of the audience is, are the groups, you mentioned group 2 there, are the groups public information, or is that something that only internal auditors can see?
The groups are all public information, and I believe it was the second or third slide I showed exactly where in the SMS scorecard where you can click, and it basically brings up a spreadsheet with everybody in the group. So the agency has released the groups in each of the safety event groups.
Okay, great, thanks. Another good question that we see in the list here is, do you have to be able to print a log at the roadside?
Well, I'll defer that question to Terry when he comes up. I'm sure he's going to be covering that. He covered that yesterday. We'll let Terry cover that one.
Yeah, okay, we can get to that later on. We'll be talking a little bit more about the different options with BigRoad, so we can certainly address that one then. And the last one is there's a question on when ELD will be required, and just stay tuned for that one as well. We're going to cover that in Terry's section as well. So yeah, so that's about all we've got for now for Jeff, but continue to ask your questions there in the chat window, and we'll attempt to get to as many of those as we can. So just give us a second here. We're going to switch on over to Terry. All right, take it away, Terry.
Great. Hello, all, and it's a pleasure to be here with Mr. Owen and Mr. Davis. Always great to talk about this with two such long-term individuals in this industry. So it's a pleasure to be here. What I want to do briefly over the next 15 minutes, I should say, is just give you an overview of what we see in terms of timeframes with regards to electronic logging devices and what's legal today. So what can you be doing today, and when do you really need to put in effect what we're going to call ELD, and we'll explain that a little bit more in detail. So just quickly on BigRoad, to get started, we started BigRoad in 2012. We started it to say, how can we put a very cost-effective, feature-rich application for small, medium-sized fleets into place? We very soon found our good friends in NASTIC with very aligned goals and objectives, and partnered with them early on. And to date, we're the #1 trucking application on the Android smartphone platforms and the iOS platforms. Today, we're working with more than 3,000 fleets. And by the Dave Nemo show and Mr. Owen, basically the industry acclaimed electronic driver logs. So that's a pretty exciting place to be. The only other point on this slide that I really like to point out is that the drivers of fleets, drivers, period, drivers, owner operators, independent contractors, small fleet operators, large fleet drivers, really like using this application. If they haven't tried it, they just don't know it yet. And so moving them to an electronic log application in all cases has been a very positive experience. And we actually take all of this to heart by asking them to review the application and give input into how this application can fit and work for them. Okay. What we're talking about today is a very highly regulated industry, maybe the most regulated industry. And I'm not going to go through all the details on the slides other than the very last point that's bolded, which is hours of service paperwork by volume is the second largest after tax filings. So you can all imagine what that means to all in terms of actually having to complete hours of service paperwork on a daily basis. And if we take a look at what it means from an industry standpoint, we're looking at 4 to 5. Nobody really knows the numbers. We have to guess after 4. Long-haul trucks and buses have to do logs on a daily basis. There's another 4+ million that have to or will have to with electronic logging devices as well manage their hours of service. That being said, more than 80%, and we think it's a lot higher today, are still using paper logbooks. And if we took a look at that from an industry standpoint, more than 1 billion paper logs are submitted and filed and stored every year. Top industry issues. We took a look at what are the industry issues that are key right now. And from the ATRA, the American Transportation Research Institute, the top 5 industry issues are, and this parallels what Jeff was referring to, hours of service, #1. #3 is CSA scores, and 5, ELD mandate. And if you take a look at them, they all kind of blend in together. Now, that being said, we all know that driver shortage and driver retention fit in there, and this very complicated subject we're talking about today kind of all dovetails together. What I want to do now is just talk about what are your options for doing hours of service and compliance. And so your driver log options today are paper, as most of the people on this call and that we work with are using today. You have the option of going to an electronic logbook, which is the picture in the bottom right, and then you also have the electronic logs, which is engine-connected version. What I'm going to do is just talk about each method and then just give what we hear from individuals in this industry, what they find in terms of the pros and the cons of each one, and then just quickly talk about how ELD fits into this. So starting with paper, a driver creates a log on a paper graph. He collects all of his supporting documents during the trip. He keeps copies of those paper copies in the cab of the vehicle with him purely for inspection purposes. And he hands in a copy of those logs at the fleet office, or if he isn't going to be back, sends them by fax or by trip pack. The fleet then takes those logs, scans them, or reproduces them and from an audit perspective, or sends them out to an audit firm. And then based upon the results of that, the fleet reprimands as required based upon the results. After that process, all of those logs are stored for 6 months plus the current month, just in case there's an audit requirement. Now, the pros of this type of solution are the driver can change the logs. So if there's a mistake on the log, something didn't happen quite the way the driver thought, and you can well imagine other situations, the driver can actually change or manipulate those logs. The other pro of this type of system is everybody knows how to do it, sort of. As Jeff said, they don't do it very well, but everybody is aware of the paper process that's in place today. So the pro is there's no process change. The con of this solution is it takes 1 to up to 6 weeks for that information to become realistic or valuable to the fleet. It could be ridden with form and manner violations, as we talked about, is the number one violation in the industry. And from a fleet operating, it's what is my current liability? What is the liability of all my driver's logs and of what I've got driving on the road right now? And then the next question is, what happens if I get audited? Will they find anything? Will they not find anything? So those are the cons. Let's move over to electronic logbook. Logs are automatically created using mobile technology, a smartphone or a tablet in the cab of the vehicle. The driver still has to capture and keep with them his supporting documents, but he can do it electronically now, scan them, and it's part of his trip sheet for the view. The application now stores 7 days of logs, not printed, but on the device, so there's no printing required in that regard, and has those available for inspection purposes. The logs now are audited and visible to the fleet in real time. So at any point in the day, a operator, fleet safety person, dispatcher, owner, clicks on a button and says, how are my guys doing today? Do I have any potential violations on the road in real time? And I'm alerted to those as we're going along. What this allows me to do is if I find a violation or an issue or a potential pending issue, is I can coach my drivers in real time. Now, with that being said, all of my logs are still stored for 6 months plus the current month and ready and available for audit. The pros of this, guess what? The driver can still edit his log. What we're doing, and David Owen, he discussed this, is we're really replacing that paper with a piece of electronic software on a tablet that he can still edit his log. But we're getting real-time status without risk, so you know exactly what's going on with the drivers. What we do 100% of the time is actually eliminate those form and manner issues. They just go away. The driver's aware of them with those little pesky triangles that we put on there, and then the fleet is aware of those as well. The real-time status is key. So at any time you can see where the driver is, what he's doing, what's the traffic around him, all those sorts of things as well. So it actually gets more into the fleet management side. So where's my driver, and do I want to get documents back for processing? Do I have freight damage, vehicle damage? All of that's now available in the trip view. So what are the cons? The only con to this example, because drivers already have phones, is process change. Changing from paper, worrying that the driver is going to basically not like going to electronic logs is the only con that we can think of in this example. Now let's move to engine connected. So what changes in engine connected? Basically, logs are created automatically, electronically. Excuse me. A driver captures the supporting documents. All the logs are stored, visible, dashboard views, real-time coaching, everything that you get in electronic logs. But let's take a look at the pros. What are the pros of this? Real-time status, no risk. That's great. No form of manner. Yes, that's great. Where's my driver? That's great. We talked about that. Document capture. So all of the electronic log capabilities from the previous slide. The other advantage here is now you are ELD ready, electronic logging device ready, and future-proofing your organization. So what are the cons? In this example now, the driver cannot edit logs. So the only difference between the electronic log version and the engine connected version, which we call dashlink, is driver cannot edit logs. Now, the other con, of course, is still process change, changing into this environment where a driver can't change logs. So those are your three options. Now, let's just quickly talk about what an electronic logging device is. So what is the mandate or the proposed specification? It is a connected to vehicle solution that is recording movement of the vehicle and is tamper resistant. The record of duty status is created from those conditions when the driver is actually driving the vehicle, when the vehicle is moving, and the logs are inspectable at Roadside. And from an audit standpoint, there's a full record on the server that's comprehensive for the audit authorities, but as well shows if there has been a change to the log, what was the original and why were they changed. That is the main difference between ELD. We've actually produced an ELD ebook. If anybody wants that, please make a request. We'll get it out to you as well. And this lines up, the acronyms, which are ELD, EOBR, AOBRD, E-logbook, and what are the different features or requirements of each. And you can see this grid here that lines it out very nicely for you. If you want it, the source of this is actually the ELD ebook. And moving on. So timeline. So there was a question earlier about timeline. And what is the timeline for compliance? The latest news that has come out, or messaging about when is this mandate going to come into place, is September 30th, 2015, the FMC has committed to publish the final ELD specification. So that means ELDs will be permitted, but not mandated immediately. There will be a 2-year compliance window. So the example is, if the mandate comes in on September 30, 2015, and you're on paper logs, you will be required to have an ELD in your vehicles for all your drivers by September 30th, 2017. So ELDs will be required for all fleets using paper logs. Now, if you went to the AOBRD solution, the 395.15, the current version of an engine-connected solution that's legal and allowed today, you will actually have a 2-year grandfather clause before you'll have to go to the ELD specification, which we all will agree is stricter than the AOBRD specification. So ELDs required for all fleets will be in place by September 30th, 2019. Again, assuming September 30th, 2015, the FMCSA does put in the final mandate. Okay? Now, that's a lot to take, and I'll answer questions on that in a second. But what I want to do quickly is just talk about what is the technology, the driver, the in-cab technology that's required. I'm going to start with a slide. And this slide, some of you, I was just down with the NASDAQ folks at the NASDAQ conference, and so maybe some of you saw this slide, but it's one that I really like. And this gentleman, this driver, was in 2013 Transport Topics, inside cover, showing that just look at all this great technology that's being used in the cab of a truck. And when we first saw it, we were a little bit horrified because that's a lot of bells and whistles and alarms going off for that driver. So there might be a few distractions going on when I see multiple cell phones and CVs and PCs and Bluetooths and GPSs. Now, that being said, what this causes is multiple subscriptions. This driver is dealing with $60 to $200 a month in subscriptions. Doesn't look like it replaces a lot of the paperwork he has to do on a daily basis. He's still getting phone calls because he's wearing his headset, so he's still taking his 10 to 20 calls a day. And odds are still using the fax machine, and most of the fleets we work with are faxing somewhere between $20 and $80 a month of faxes. Now, let's take a look at today what's going on in the cab of the truck from a technology standpoint. In 2012, there was only 35% of vehicles with smartphones. In the 2 short years since that time, now more than 80% of cabs of vehicles are using smartphones. Smartphones or smart tablets in the cab of the vehicle. Interesting. So what does this mean? There's an app for that. And that sounds kind of funny or corny, but the reality is all of those devices that were proprietary, were purpose-built, were used for one thing, are now available in applications on the smartphone that the driver or you have already put in the cab of that vehicle. That means no more paper, or there shouldn't be any more paper. That means no more, or eliminating a lot of those phone calls. Hey, drivers like to talk. You like to talk to your driver, but a lot of the times it's a quick, hey, where are you call, or a question that could be answered via the messaging applications. And you have this supercomputer in the cab of the vehicle now with a very good camera that could be used as a scanner to replace all of the faxing and documentation in the cab of the vehicle as well. 3 examples. We've been doing this a long time here at BigRoad, and these are great examples of NASDAQ customers that we've worked with. Peace Transport, which was formerly Billy Barstow Transportation, refrigeration hauler out of Florida, came to us when their CSA score was in dire straits. His driver, Kenny, the guy beside him there, with the red shirt on, came to him and said, hey, boss, what do you think of this? And he had a tablet with BigRoad on it. That was a Thursday. By Saturday, we did online training with them. They left on Monday. Billy took his safety score right from well over 80 down over the course of the year and had no violations for a 12-month period. So very exciting. And gives us all of the credit for helping him, assisting him in putting a safety program in place that he could manage. Now he's 24 trucks in its peace transport. Xcel Petroleum, great opportunity to work with Xcel Petroleum. They are required, they're fuel haulers out of the Chicago area, and they're required to have an electronic logging device in the cab of their vehicle. They chose BigRoad because they wanted it to work on smartphones and tablets, and implemented across all their drivers. The driver acceptance was very, very good, but they used a lot of the other features on the in the application set as well, like proof of delivery of fuel, and that what you're looking at there is reading them out saying the tank is full when I left, so that there's no discrepancies with the operator of their fuel filler. And Roadrunner Transportation, which is a very, very large independent contractor organization, and we work with them to put a complete safety program into independent contractors for multiple thousands of users, and today we're working with over 650 of those. Okay, last slide. And this is the one commercial on BigRoad. BigRoad is focused on safety and compliance. We believe that it's important to start with what works for the driver, that we put technology in that the driver can use and like. It should be easy for him to learn, little effort for value. It should be low risk deployment and very cost effective. What this basically means, and this is why our synergies with NASTIC is so good, is if we're not driving value in your organization, you should be able to not be using our services anymore. We don't do contracts. If anybody's going to talk to you about doing contracts in this space, then I would actually suggest you go somewhere else. BigRoad works with NASTIC month by month and make sure that we're delivering value to your business. David, did you just wanted to touch base, and I don't know if it's appropriate or not, so I'm putting you on the spot. Apologize if I am. But you and I have worked very, very hard to make sure that this is cost effective for small trucking fleets. Did you just want to touch base on the model and how we work to make this real easy and simple and not going to break the bank?
Absolutely. And you jump in here if I misspeak. I've got help in the room. But basically, our program costs $15 a truck a month, and that allows the company, even with just one truck, to have the data stored and the data transferred to the office and all the other log audit functions that are capable with the app. So it's really fairly simple, and it's very cost effective. I don't know how you guys do it, to tell you the truth.
Volume, David, volume. We're here to help all small trucking. We do that, but you don't need to worry about it. Right?
I will say this. I think that that pricing is available to our members pretty much exclusively with, if you figure in the extra added dispatch capability.
Yeah, I think that's great. And David, maybe even it could be a good touch point to talk about your tablet technology plan as well. I mean, that's something that a lot of fleets find very interesting.
Oh, absolutely. We found a source where we can supply NASTIC members with tablets. Our smart people in the telecommunications industry tell us that the movement is rapidly toward having tablets in the truck, smart tablets in the truck, and NASTIC is in the process right now of developing a NASTIC tablet at a very, very affordable price that can be used with all providers. You don't have to change providers, and we're going to have a series of NASTIC apps that'll be sent out with that tablet. One of them will be BigRoad. So, yeah, we're really excited about that, and we think that's a move into the future, well ahead of a lot of large companies.
All right, thanks a lot, David. So I think we're going to wrap things up now. If you have any other questions, you can feel free to reply to your invitation email there, and we'll do our best to answer those. We're going to make this presentation available to everybody who signed up. So don't worry about that. We'll email you out a link once that's up and ready to go. It's going to take probably a couple days just to get all the questions answered and to make sure we have everything sewn up in a nice package for you, but that'll be sent out very soon. So thanks a lot for everybody
Lee, this is David again. Just before we go, I would like to thank all the NASTIC members on the line again, particularly Doyle Sims and Son. And we anticipate following up with everybody that was in attendance today with a phone call and a personal conversation about what we talked about today.
Awesome. Great. Thanks a lot, David. What I'd like to do now is actually invite one of our customers, Xcel Petroleum, I believe is on the line. We'll see if they're still with us. Guys, if you can unmute your line with *6 if it's muted, and let us know if you're there, that would be great.
Yep, how you doing?
Great. So from Xcel, we've got, I believe, Kevin Bullman, who's the president, and Jason Lowry may be there as well. I'm not sure. He's the safety manager. So great. Okay. So we've got a few questions for you guys to answer. I think the first question we wanted to ask you was basically, how did you start using BigRoad? How did you get it rolled out to your users?
We selected a few drivers that we felt were easy to deal with and were savvy with electronics. Not that it takes an individual that has to be savvy with electronics, but with no pushback. And we used them as like our test drivers, and we kind of broke ourselves in and learned from this system. And then we rolled it out to everybody else, and we had those drivers available to the other drivers to answer questions.
What are you guys actually using in the cabs of your trucks in terms of devices and stuff?
We used Note 2 and Note 3 Samsungs. Just a regular phone with the Android system on it.
And that's what we love about it is having it on a smartphone. It's the flexibility of that phone. That phone provides us with so much information.
Cool, great. So we had just a question from the audience, actually, that would be interesting for you guys to comment on. Did you lose any drivers because they didn't want to participate?
No, none at all. Actually, it's been a great recruitment tool. And what we've found, we've went through about a 250% growth since we implemented this. And what I found in the interview process, drivers were requesting to come on with us because they want electronic logs.
That's interesting. We've heard similar things from other companies as well. I think there's a stigma still attached to electronic logs in a lot of people's minds where they think it's going to be a big deterrent to drivers. But what we found is actually it's only a deterrent to the drivers who are causing problems for the most part. So
when we first rolled it out, we had no pushback from all the drivers. And the feedback they were getting from the drivers that first started it was so positive. They were happy to bring it on.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how you sort of integrate BigRoad into your whole safety and compliance program there at Xcel? What role does it play for you guys?
On my level as a safety director, before to go through logs, I had to do it all individually. Now I bring it up right on the dispatch page and I can go over each one as they're putting them in, or, you know, if I miss a couple of days, I can go back and audit them all together like that. So as a tool in that manner, it's been great.
Okay, super. And I guess maybe you can touch on a little bit your experience with the engine connected variety now, because you guys are one of our first beta customers for DashLink. So can you tell us a little bit about your experience with this DashLink preview that we're doing with you guys right now?
Actually, I ran that one myself for the test for the very first time. I had no issues. I think it went into a sensor failure one time, which come to find out that my power source had cut out. Besides that, you just set it on the dash, and the only thing that we do is we add our notes like loading, unloading, BOL numbers. Besides that, you set it on the dash and pretty much forget about it. It takes care of itself. Changes your duty status for driving, on duty.
And what is it you're setting on the dash, Jason?
The phone, the note.
Right.
Great. Okay. Super. So yeah, and we've been working with these guys closely during a sort of preview period, so we can get all the kinks worked out. And it's been really great working with you. It's super to have some customers who are kind of ahead of the curve and can get a lot out of the system. It's really nice to see. So thanks, guys, for coming and talking to us today. It was really appreciated.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
I think actually we might have one of our customers has joined the conference here and also a NASTIC member. I'm just going to ask if Sharon from Doyle Sims & Sons is on the line. Sharon, are you there?
Yes.
Great. So it's so nice to have you here today, Sharon. We had just a few questions for you before we get to the end of our time here that I wondered if you could answer for people and give them your perspective as one of our users. So the first question I wanted to ask is, why did you make the transition from paper to electronic logs and I guess BigRoad specifically?
Really, mostly it had to do with cost. We're now at almost 100 drivers, and just the cost of the paper logs, the auditing them, storing them, it just became overwhelming. So we wanted something that was easier for us to use, more cost efficient, and easier for the drivers. Because like everybody else, we were having the form and manner issues and the things like that with the logs.
Okay, great. So did you have any trouble getting your drivers using BigRoad, or?
We started out with just a few. We actually had some that were already using it on their own that we didn't even know about till we started using it. And we started out with a few of them that we knew were tech savvy and let them start using it. And then we got good feedback from all of them. So we basically just didn't give them a choice, really. We just mandated it. We did have a lot of older drivers. And when I say older, I mean drivers that's been with us for 15, 20 years that were giving us some pushback. But once we mandated it and put them on it, they love it. I have not had anybody complain. They all love it.
Oh, that's great to hear, for sure. And we've had similar feedback from others. We were talking to the guys from Xcel yesterday, and they said actually it's been a bit of a recruiting tool. Once people start using it, it's just one less thing they have to worry about. So that's great. I'm glad you guys had a similar experience. I guess the main question I had left was, how does BigRoad kind of fit into your overall safety and compliance strategy? Where do you think it's most valuable for you?
Well, it lets me have real-time access to my drivers to see, how they're doing, and not just on hours of service, but on their form and manner, because that's where we had the biggest issues. We weren't having a lot of violations, but when we would audit logs, we were getting tons of violations because they were just form and manner issues. And now I can see immediately if they have a violation, and I can see if there's a driver that I need to work with. And it's let me see drivers that were having issues that I really didn't even know were having issues. So I can see immediately if there's somebody that's having a problem that I need to work with. It works, especially when new drivers coming in.
Super.
So, I don't have to worry what's going to happen if somebody gets an inspection. I know they're in good shape, so I don't have to worry about that part of it.
All right, great. Well, thanks a lot, Sharon, for giving us the details about how you guys are using BigRoad. We really appreciate you being on the call here today. So we'll leave it there, and thanks again for everyone, and Terry and Jeff for giving us your expertise.
Thank you all.